All right, let's jump right into a puzzle that I'm pretty sure we've all faced. You're interested in someone, maybe a potential partner, maybe a new friend, and you decide to put yourself out there. You send a little signal, and then crickets. You get nothing back. It feels like you're completely invisible. So why does this happen so often? Why do our signals, which feel so massive and risky to us, just get totally lost in translation?
Yeah, this is the exact feeling, isn't it? You work up all this courage to make a move, and in your head, it feels like you've just set off a giant flashing neon sign. But to the other person, it's barely a flicker. In this explainer, we're going to break down why this super frustrating miscommunication is so common, and more importantly, what you can actually do about it.
Okay, here's our game plan. First, we're going to explore why our little overtures so often feel invisible. Then, we'll get into the science and look at the psychological bias that's messing with us. We'll also touch on why we're so afraid of having the talk and see how this isn't just about romance with something called the friendship reset. Then, we get practical with a guide to tough conversations before we wrap up with a totally new way to think about communication. So, to kick things off, we have to get our heads around this fundamental conflict that's always at play when we try to connect with someone. It's this classic battle in our brains. You've got this really strong pull towards closeness, but it's met with this equally strong fear of being rejected or embarrassed. This internal tug of war is pretty much the entire setup for what social scientists call the relationship game.
You know, the sociologist Irving Goffman just absolutely nailed this idea. He's basically saying that this ambiguity, this vagueness, it isn't a failure of the system, it's a feature. We do it on purpose. We use these really subtle signals to protect ourselves, to save face in this very delicate social dance. The only problem is, this dance is also the perfect recipe for being completely misunderstood.
So, if we're all playing this kind of ambiguous game, what is going on in our brains that makes us so bad at judging our own moves? Well, this is where we run straight into something called the signal amplification bias, and it's really the psychological key to this whole mess.
And here it is, the signal amplification bias. In plain English, it just means we think our signals are way, way louder than they actually are. We seriously overestimate how much interest our small, safe little gestures are really communicating. And the crazier part? The more we're afraid of being rejected, the stronger this bias gets.
This, right here, just illustrates that disconnect perfectly. See, from your point of view, making that tiny gesture meant climbing a huge mountain of fear and self-doubt, so the action itself feels massive. But the other person? They can't see any of that internal drama. All they see is the final product, the small, subtle, and probably pretty ambiguous gesture. They have no clue what it took for you to do it. Psychologists actually call this the expected augmenting process. It sounds complicated, but it's pretty simple. 1, you feel held back by your fear. 2, and this is the big mistake, you just assume that your fear is written all over your face. And 3, because you think they can see how scared you are, you expect them to augment your signal, to think, whoa, for them to do that while being so nervous, they must be really interested. But they can't see your fear, so the signal never gets turned up. This bias, this whole game of invisible signals, it's all running on one fuel source: fear. The deep-seated fear of rejection. So what happens when that fear just gets to be too much? Well, we fall back on our most common and often our most destructive coping mechanism. And let's be clear, this fear is incredibly common. In one study of undergraduates, over 75%, that's 3 out of every 4 students, said that a fear of being rejected had been a major roadblock for them in pursuing a relationship in the past. It's a nearly universal human thing, maybe a leftover from a time when getting kicked out of the tribe could literally mean death. So when we're faced with that kind of fear and the tough conversations that might come with it, our go-to strategy is almost always avoidance. We just kick the can down the road. Sure, it gives us a little bit of temporary relief from the anxiety, but it is a total trap. As one therapist points out, every single time we delay, the resentment builds, the problem just gets bigger, and the conversation you eventually have to have becomes even harder. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, this is all about dating and romance. But these communication breakdowns are becoming more and more relevant in all our relationships. The need for clear, direct communication isn't just for finding a partner anymore. It's actually reshaping our friendships too. Psychologists are seeing this trend they're calling a friendship reset. And it's not about huge dramatic fights or betrayals. It's about the slow burn pressures of modern life. We're all burnt out, we have new responsibilities, and we're all becoming more aware of our emotional boundaries. In this kind of world, subtle, ambiguous signals just don't cut it anymore. Clear, intentional communication is becoming the vital skill for keeping all of our important bonds strong. Okay, so we've dug into the why.
the bias, the fear, the avoidance. Now, let's switch gears to the how. It's time to get into a practical toolkit for actually having those conversations you've been putting off.
This is your action plan. First, prepare. Don't ambush them. Schedule a time and take a few minutes to get yourself centered. Second, go in with an open mind. Remember, you can't control how they react. The goal is just to be heard. Third, use I statements. We'll talk more about those in a sec. Fourth, actually listen. Don't just sit there planning what you're going to say next. And finally, if things get too hot, it is totally okay to take a break, just as long as you promise to come back to it.
All right, that third step is so important that it gets its own slide. The I statement is basically your superpower in a difficult conversation. And the formula is super simple. I felt a specific emotion when a specific thing happened. The reason this works so well is that it keeps the focus on your experience. And, as one therapist puts it, no one can really argue with how you feel.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. I mean, look at the left side. The you statement is pure accusation. It's basically an invitation for a fight. But on the right, the I statement, I felt an extra burden, it's not an attack. It's just a description of your emotional reality. It invites them to understand you, not defend themselves.
Okay, finally, let's reframe the entire goal of even having these conversations. It's not about winning or losing. It's about gathering information. This is a small but really powerful shift in how you think about it, and it can take away a lot of the fear.
This is the key takeaway. How a person responds when you use these skills, when you calmly and respectfully tell them how you feel using an I statement, that response is incredibly valuable data. If they get defensive, if they dismiss you, if they disrespect you, well, that tells you something really important about them and about the health of that relationship. Their reaction is pure information that helps you decide what to do next.
So we'll end with this. Now that you know about the invisible signals, the fear that holds us back, and the tools to actually speak up clearly, what's that one conversation you've been avoiding? Maybe it's finally time to stop whispering and make yourself heard. Thanks for watching.